So we're here today to talk about the social media aspects of Safe Sanctuaries. And we're here with DG. Thank you for joining me today.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks so much for asking me.
Yeah, so we have several questions because we want to make sure that our congregations understand just the basics of Safe Sanctuaries. Sure. First question, social media is part of our reality within the church and community, and can be challenging for leaders who did not grow up as digital natives that we have now. What are some unique considerations for Safe Sanctuaries in a virtual world?
First of all, I think you're exactly right. I think there are so many people that are going, what is this? And where did it come from? And why is it just pouncing on me right now?
Right.
But I think that it is vitally important for us to be able to realize that this is a reality that we live in the world today. We have to deal with social media, and we have to be able to have some of the things that the Methodist Church is so great about is we actually have a response to it. And so now that it's been brought upon us, whether we chose to accept it or not, we really should probably accept it and realize that it has awesome, amazing opportunities, but it also has challenges that we have to live through as well. So I think some of the unique aspects of it is, I think overall we have to understand that the social media is no different, and the virtual world is no different than the real world that we live in. It is just another space that communication occurs and happens in. And so it's nothing to be afraid of necessarily. It should just be, have a healthy respect of it.
That's great, that's great. A lot of times I say to people, it's a tool. It's neither good nor evil, it's how we use it.
Right, exactly. Printing press was the same way, computers were the same way, cell phones, yeah, exactly.
Good points to make. What are some of the best ways to use technology in ministry with children, youth, and older adults?
Sure. I think that the best uses of technology is to be able to hone in the beautiful, beautiful gift that it is to help create community and deepen relationships. That piece of it is just unfathomable. And I think that sometimes we haven't even touched upon some of the possibilities that it could be able to be used for deepening relationships and community. On the flip side, it could also be used to damage those things. And so I think that you need to have a healthy respect and a healthy understanding that when you do use it, that you're using it in a way that is honoring and respecting everyone that's involved in it. We are living out our Christian lives every day. One of my favorite stories is I was in college, and I remember hearing a nun on a radio show talking about all of the people walking around or driving around in their cars with the Christian ichthus fish on the bumpers. And she said, and I'll never forget it, she said, why do we have to expect a Christian fish to represent who we are when we should be living our lives in that way? And I immediately went to the back of my car and ripped off the fish.
Oh, wow.
And the same thing's true of our real lives, and the same thing is especially true when it comes to the virtual world and the cyber world, that we are called to be living as disciples of Christ, and we're called to be the church. And when we live out our lives in those realms, no matter what it is, no matter how we're communicating, that we have to make sure we are holding ourselves responsible and holding ourselves accountable to how other people are seeing us as a church. I think it's so vitally important to make sure that wherever we go, we are representing Christ. We are representing the church, the United Methodist Church. And so when it comes to our interaction with teens and children and parents and people that are not even a part of the church, everything we do, everything we say, every post we put up, every text message we send is another opportunity to be able to show who we are in Christ. Absolutely. And we're not perfect, obviously, but we need to probably set some kind of boundaries in our own lives, but also in our usage of social media and technology.
Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful. So DG, what are some of the most important points to cover in developing policies and guidelines around cyber safety with children and youth?
Sure. I think that the overarching understanding that you could always ask yourself is there's no difference between the real world and the cyber world.
Right.
We all have healthy guidelines. Hopefully, we've have those in our own life. It would be greatly beneficial to make sure that you're not alone with a person of the opposite sex. And I mean, there's just some general understandings and guidelines. I think most churches probably already have some form of expectation of leadership and people who volunteer and staff and things like that. So I think that it's not too difficult to be able to take what has already been understood as appropriate and then trying to translate that into the virtual world. So whatever those things are that have already been defined in our churches could easily be translated into a virtual world. So look at the Safe Sanctuaries aspects that are there. We've already given beautiful guidelines to our churches, and why can't you be able to translate some of those things into the virtual world? So, for example, a private text or a private message on Facebook or Twitter or any other social media means probably would be more helpful if you were actually doing that in a group text or in a public space, because for the safety of yourself as well as everyone else that's involved, it would allow for a third party to be present in the midst of those kinds of things. And there, obviously, I think that teens are going to be more drawn, for some reason, they're more drawn to be able to open up a little bit easier when they're not face to face. And so it's a comfortable space for them to be in with using social media and things like that. But I think it's really good for you to be able to teach them and to help them how they can be able to move their desires for using technology and social media, but also into a real world understanding too. So again, I think it just needs to be able to mirror as best as possible the real world understandings of what we have as far as policies and guidelines.
Yeah, great points, thank you. So another question, in ministry with children and youth, communication through technology is just inevitable, like you're talking about right now.
If you even want to remotely be effective in it, that's exactly right. You need to accept it, that's right.
So healthy boundaries for leaders. You know, we talk about setting boundaries for our children and our youth, but what about in leadership? What boundaries should we set for ourselves as far as social media is concerned?
Yeah, I think that's, again, those boundaries are in place not only for the safety of the children and the youth, but also for you. And I think too often, even adults, even grown adults, have that misperception thinking that social media allows them to be a little bit more expressive of who they are. You know, we wear our favorite T-shirts and we wear our favorite, whatever it is, to be able to show express our individuality. But sometimes that temptation goes a little bit too far. And so in some cases, inappropriate photos, inappropriate language, all of these different things, whether you think it's just fine for yourself to be able to place that, more often than not, if we could just put ourselves in the people who would be seeing those things, then we would realize that we could be doing more damage to them and their discipleship and our witness by what we do. And so I think some of those boundaries that need to be in place, it would be, in some cases, very specific for that location. So some youth groups might have more people involved on Facebook than on Twitter or on Instagram than Facebook. And so you need to be able to find out what those areas are of the technology that they are using, and then having some form of accountability, some form of education. All of those things come into play whenever you need to set those guidelines and those boundaries for the adults as well as for the youth.
Awesome, thank you. So if in writing a covenant around social media, who needs to be a part of that covenant in a congregation?
Sure. I think as many people as possible is what I would say. I think the definite people that have to be a part of that covenant have to be anyone who's in a volunteering understanding, anyone who's staff, especially the clergy, I think the youth need to be involved in it to a certain extent, but I think the most important piece that a lot of people forget is the parents have to be involved. They have to be involved. You're dealing with minors in most cases, and the only people that can be able to give permission on what can be represented, maybe a photo of the youth group from the mission trip that they just went on. If you're going to place that on the church's website, you need to have permission from the parents to be able to do that. So all of those covenants need to be done in all those cases. And I think there's some healthy boundaries. Safe Sanctuaries does a really great job of being able to find out some suggestions and guidelines for saying, you can't just have someone coming off the street and start volunteering with the youth.
That would be a problem.
Exactly. So those boundaries are set there in those cases. But I think that eventually, what's wrong with giving them a covenant and setting those expectations up front and saying, this is what we expect, and this is who we are here, and this is who the Methodists are, and that we are proud to be who we are. But we actually love our youth, we love our children, and we love our volunteers, and we love you. And so all of these need to be set in place to be able to make a healthy ministry and community.
Well, DG, thank you so much for being here with us today. This is great information for the church, and you're a blessing to the church.
Well, I'm honored to be a part of the church, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.